Dad, those two kids sleeping in the trash look like me, said Pedro, pointing to the little ones sleeping in each other's arms on an old mattress on the sidewalk. Eduardo Fernandez stopped and followed his 5-year-old son's finger with his gaze. Two children of apparently the same age slept huddled between bags of trash, wearing dirty, torn clothes, their feet bare and injured. Before we begin this moving story, comment below with the city you are viewing it from and leave your like to continue following us. The businessman felt a lump in his throat when he saw the scene, but he tried to pull Pedro's hand to continue walking to the car. He had just picked him up from the private school where he studied, and like every Friday afternoon, they were returning home through the city center. It was a route that Eduardo usually avoided, always preferring to pass through the more affluent neighborhoods. But heavy traffic and an accident on the main avenue had forced them to drive through that poorer and more rundown area. The narrow streets were full of homeless people, street vendors, and children playing among the trash piled up on the sidewalks. However, the boy broke free with surprising strength and ran toward the children, completely ignoring his father's protests. Eduardo followed him, concerned not only about the reaction he might have upon seeing so much misery up close, but also about the dangers that this area posed. There were constant reports of theft, drug trafficking, and violence. Their expensive clothes and the gold watch on their wrist made them easy targets. Pedro knelt down next to the filthy mattress and looked at the faces of the two children who were fast asleep, exhausted from life on the streets. One had light brown hair, wavy and shiny despite the dust, just like his, and the other was dark-skinned with slightly darker skin. But both had facial features very similar to his, the same arched, expressive eyebrows, the same oval, delicate face, even the same dimple on the chin that Pedro had inherited from his deceased mother. Eduardo approached slowly with a growing uneasiness that soon turned into something close to panic. There was something deeply disturbing about that resemblance, something that went far beyond a mere coincidence. It was as if he were seeing three versions of the same creature at different moments in his life. "Pedro, let's go right now. We can't stay here," said Eduardo, trying to lift his son firmly, but without taking his eyes off the sleeping children, unable to look away from that impossible sight. "They look just like me, Dad. Look at their eyes," insisted Pedro, when one of the little ones moved slowly and opened his eyes with difficulty. Sleepy-eyed, he revealed two green eyes identical to Pedro's, not only in color, but also in their almond shape, the intensity of their gaze, and that natural sparkle that Eduardo knew so well. The child was frightened to see strangers nearby and quickly woke his brother with gentle but urgent taps on the shoulder. The two woke up with a start, hugging each other, visibly trembling, not only from the cold, but from pure instinctive fear. Eduardo noticed that they both had exactly the same curls as Pedro, only with different shades, in the same body posture, the same way of moving, even the same way of breathing when they were nervous. "Please don't hurt us," said the brown-haired one, instinctively placing himself in front of his younger brother in a protective gesture that Eduardo immediately recognized with a shudder. It was exactly the same way Pedro protected his younger classmates at school when some bully tried to intimidate them. The same defensive movement, the same brave posture despite visible fear. The businessman felt his legs shake violently and had to lean against a brick wall to keep from falling. The resemblance between the three children was striking, terrifying, impossible to attribute to chance. Every gesture, every expression, every body movement was identical. The dark-haired boy opened his eyes fully, and Eduardo almost fainted on the spot. They were the same piercing green eyes as Pedro's, but there was something even more disturbing. The expression of curiosity mixed with caution, the particular way he frowned when he was confused or scared, even the way he cringed slightly when he felt fear. Everything was exactly the same as what he saw in his son every day. The three were the same height, had the same slim build, and together they looked like perfect reflections in a fragmented mirror. Eduardo braced himself harder against the wall, feeling the world spinning around him. "What are your names?" Pedro asked with the innocence of his 5 years, sitting down on the dirty sidewalk, not caring about getting his expensive school uniform dirty. "I'm Lucas," replied the brown-haired boy, relaxing when he realized that this child his age posed no threat, unlike the adults who used to chase them away from public spaces. And this is Mateo, my younger brother, he added, pointing tenderly to the dark-haired boy beside him. Eduardo felt the world spinning even faster, as if the ground were disappearing beneath his feet. Those were exactly the names he and Patricia had chosen for their other two children, in case the complicated pregnancy resulted in triplets, names written down on a piece of paper, kept lovingly in the nightstand drawer. Discussed during long, sleepless nights, names he had never mentioned to Pedro or anyone else after his wife's death. It was an absolutely impossible, terrifying false incidents that defied all logic and reason. You live here on the street, Pedro continued, talking to the children as if it were the most natural thing in the world, brushing Lucas's dirty hand with a familiarity that disturbed Eduardo even more. We don't have a real home, Mateo said in a weak, hoarse voice, probably from crying or calling for help so much. The aunt who took care of us said she no longer had money to support us and brought us here at dawn. She said someone would show up to help us. Eduardo moved even closer, slowly, desperately trying to process what he was seeing and hearing without losing his sanity. Not only did the three seem to be the same age and have the same physical features, but they also shared the same automatic, unconscious gestures. All three scratched the back of their right ear in the same way when they were nervous. All three bit their lower lip in the same spot when they hesitated before speaking. All three blinked in the same way when they were concentrating. These were small details, imperceptible to most people, but devastating to a father who knew his son's every gesture. "How long have you been here on the street alone?" Eduardo asked, his voice completely broken, kneeling next to Pedro on the filthy sidewalk, not caring about his expensive suit. 3 days and 3 nights, Lucas replied, counting carefully with his small, dirty fingers, but with a precision that revealed intelligence. Aunt Marcia brought us here at dawn when no one was on the street and said she would come back the next day with food and clean clothes. But she hasn't come back yet. Eduardo felt the blood freeze in his veins, as if an electric shock had run through his entire body. Marcia. That name echoed in his mind like a deafening thunderclap, awakening memories he had tried to bury for years. Marcia was the name of Patricia's younger sister, a troubled and unstable woman who had completely disappeared from family life right after the traumatic birth and death of her sister, a woman Patricia had often talked about, saying she was suffering from serious financial difficulties, drug addiction, and abusive relationships. A sister who had borrowed money countless times during Patricia's pregnancy, always with different excuses, and then disappeared without a trace or address. A woman who was present at the hospital throughout the labor, asking strange questions about medical procedures and what would happen to the babies in case of complications. Pedro looked at his father with his green eyes filled with genuine tears, gently touching Lucas's arm. "Dad, they're very hungry. Look how skinny and weak they are. We can't leave them here alone." Eduardo looked more closely at the two children in the evening light and saw that they were indeed severely malnourished. Their worn and patched clothes hung from their fragile bodies like rags. Their faces were pale and sunken, with deep circles under their eyes. Their dull, tired eyes revealed days without adequate food or restful sleep. Next to them on the filthy mattress was a nearly empty bottle of water and a torn plastic bag with the remains of stale, soggy bread. Their small hands were dirty and injured, with cuts and scratches, probably from rummaging through the trash looking for something to eat. "Did you get anything to eat today?" asked Eduardo, kneeling down to the children's level, trying to control the growing emotion in his voice. "Yesterday morning, a man who works at the bakery on the corner gave us an old sandwich to share," said Mateo, his eyes downcast, ashamed of the situation. "But today we didn't get anything. Some people walk by, look at us with pity, but pretend not to see us and keep walking quickly." Pedro immediately took a whole package of filled cookies out of his expensive school backpack and offered it to the children with a spontaneous and generous gesture that filled Eduardo with paternal pride and existential terror at the same time. "You can eat everything. My dad always buys me more, and we have lots of delicious food at home." Lucas and Mateo looked directly at Eduardo, asking for permission with their big, hopeful eyes, a natural gesture of politeness and respect that contrasted dramatically with the desperate, and degrading situation they found themselves in. Someone had taught these abandoned children good manners and values. Eduardo nodded, still desperately trying to understand what was happening in front of him. What force of destiny had brought these children into his path? They shared the cookies with a delicacy and care that deeply touched Eduardo's heart. They carefully broke each cookie in half. They always offered each other first before eating. They chewed slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a royal feast. There was no rush, no greed, only pure gratitude. "Thank you very much," they said in unison. And Eduardo was absolutely certain that he had heard those voices before, not just once or twice, but thousands of times. It wasn't just the high-pitched, childlike tone, but the specific intonation, the particular rhythm of speech, the exact way of pronouncing each word. Everything was absolutely identical to Pedro's voice. It was like listening to recordings of his son at different moments in his life. As he watched the three children together sitting on the dirty floor, the similarities became increasingly obvious and terrifying, impossible to ignore or rationalize. It wasn't just the striking physical resemblance, the unconscious and automatic gestures, the particular way they tilted their heads slightly to the right when paying attention to something, even the specific way they smiled, showing their upper teeth first. Everything was identical in every detail. Pedro seemed to have found two exact versions of himself, living in miserable conditions in the world. "Do you know anything about who your real parents are?" Eduardo asked, trying to keep his voice controlled and casual, even though his heart was beating so wildly that it hurt in his chest. "Aunt Marcia always said that our mom died when we were born in the hospital," Lucas explained, repeating the words as if they were a lesson memorized and repeated 1,000 times, "and that our dad couldn't take care of us because he already had another young child to raise on his own and couldn't afford it." Eduardo felt his heart racing violently, beating so hard that he was sure everyone could hear it. Patricia had indeed died during the complicated delivery, losing a lot of blood and going into shock. And Marcia had mysteriously disappeared right after the funeral, claiming she couldn't bear to stay in the city where her sister had died so young. But now it all made terrifying and devastating sense. Marcia hadn't just run away from the pain and sad memories. She had taken something precious with her, someone with her, two children with her. "And can you remember anything from when you were babies?" insisted Eduardo, his hands shaking visibly as he obsessively observed every detail of the children's angelic faces, looking for more similarities. "More evidence. We don't remember almost anything," said Mateo, shaking his head sadly. "Aunt Marcia always said that we were born on the same day as another brother, but that he stayed with our dad because he was stronger and healthier, and we went with her because we needed special care." Pedro opened his green eyes in a way that Eduardo knew very well, that expression of sudden and terrifying understanding that appeared when he solved a difficult problem or understood something complex. "Dad, they're talking about me, aren't they? I'm the brother who stayed with you because I was stronger, and they're my brothers who went with Auntie." Eduardo had to lean with both hands on the rough wall to keep from fainting completely. The pieces of the most terrible puzzle of his life were falling into place brutally and definitively before his eyes. Patricia's extremely complicated pregnancy, her consistently high blood pressure, and constant threats of premature labor. The traumatic delivery that lasted more than 18 hours. The severe bleeding, the desperate minutes when the doctors fought tirelessly to save both the mother and the children. He vaguely remembered the doctors talking urgently about serious complications, about difficult medical decisions, about saving whoever could be saved. He remembered Patricia dying slowly in his arms, whispering broken words that he couldn't understand at the time, but which now made terrible sense. And he remembered Marcia perfectly, always present at the hospital during those tense days, always nervous and restless, always asking detailed questions about medical procedures and what exactly would happen to the children in the event of serious complications or the death of the mother. "Lucas, Mateo," said Eduardo, his voice completely trembling and broken, as tears began to roll freely down his face without any attempt to hide them. "Would you like to come home, take a hot shower, and eat something delicious and nutritious?" The two children looked at each other with the natural and learned distrust of those who were forced by cruel circumstances to understand, in the worst possible way, that not all adults had good intentions toward them. They had spent entire days on the dangerous streets, exposed to all kinds of risks, violence, and exploitation. "You're not going to hurt us later, are you?" Lucas asked in a small, frightened voice that revealed both desperate hope and pure, irrational fear. "Never, I promise," Pedro replied immediately, before his father could even open his mouth, quickly getting up and extending both hands toward Lucas and Mateo. "My dad is very kind and loving. He takes good care of me every day and can take care of you too, like a real family." Eduardo watched with fascination the absolutely impressive naturalness with which Pedro spoke to the children, as if he had known them intimately for years. There was an inexplicable and powerful connection between the three of them, something that went far beyond their striking physical resemblance. It was as if they recognized each other instinctively, as if there was an emotional and spiritual bond between them that completely transcended logic and reason. "All right then," Mateo finally said, slowly getting up and carefully picking up the torn plastic bag containing the few miserable possessions they had in the world. "But if you are mean to us or try to hurt us, we know how to run fast and hide. We will never be bad," Eduardo assured him with absolute sincerity, watching with a heavy heart as Mateo carefully stored the remains of soggy bread in the bag, even though he knew they would be eating something infinitely better. It was pure survival instinct, typical of someone who knows real, devastating hunger intimately. As they walked slowly through the crowded streets toward the luxury car, Eduardo noticed that practically everyone who passed by stared at them, stopped, whispered among themselves, and pointed discreetly. It was impossible not to notice that they looked like identical triplets. Some of the more curious passers-by stopped completely. They made admiring comments about the striking resemblance. Others even took secret photos with their phones. Pedro held Lucas's hand firmly, and Lucas held Mateo's, as if it were something completely instinctive and natural, as if they had always walked exactly like this through the streets of life. "Dad," Pedro said suddenly, stopping abruptly in the middle of the crowded sidewalk and looking directly into his father's eyes. "I always dreamed that I had brothers who looked exactly like me. I dreamed that we played together every day, that they knew the same things I know, that we were never alone or sad. And now they're really here, as if by magic." Eduardo felt a chill run through his body as he heard Pedro's words. On the way to the car, he watched their every move with an obsessive attention that bordered on paranoia. The way Lucas helped Mateo walk when he stumbled was identical to the way Pedro always helped the most fragile or needy people. The way Mateo carefully held the plastic bag with his meager belongings was exactly the same as the extreme care Pedro showed with his favorite toys or objects he considered important. Even the natural cadence of their steps was perfectly synchronized, as if the three had meticulously rehearsed that walk for years. Eduardo noticed that all three put their right foot down first when stepping onto the sidewalk, that they all swung their left arm slightly as they walked, that they all instinctively looked both ways before crossing any street. These were small details that might go unnoticed by a casual observer, but they were devastatingly significant to a father who knew his son's every movement intimately. When they finally reached the black Mercedes parked on the busy corner, Lucas and Mateus stopped abruptly in front of the vehicle, their eyes wide with admiration and amazement. "Is this beautiful car really yours, sir?" Lucas asked, reverently touching the shiny, immaculate bodywork. "It's my dad's," Pedro replied, with the naturalness typical of someone who had grown up surrounded by luxury. "We always take it to school, the club, the mall, and everywhere else we need to go." Eduardo watched closely as the children reacted genuinely to the authentic beige leather interior and gleaming gold accents. There was no trace of envy, greed, or resentment in their innocent eyes, only pure curiosity and respectful admiration. Mateus ran his dirty little hand over the soft seats with extreme reverence, as if he were touching something sacred and untouchable. "I've never ridden in such a beautiful and fragrant car in my life," he whispered with genuine admiration. "It looks like one of those cars on TV where the rich and famous appear." During the entire silent journey to the imposing mansion located in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city, Eduardo couldn't take his eyes off the rearview mirror for a single second. The three children chatted animatedly in the back seat, as if they were old friends, reuniting after a long and painful separation. Pedro enthusiastically pointed out the tourist attractions and important sights of the city through the window. Lucas asked intelligent and insightful questions about absolutely everything he saw along the way, and Mateus listened with rapt attention, occasionally making profound comments that revealed an impressive and disturbing maturity for a child of only 5 years old. That tall building you see over there is where my dad works every day, Pedro explained, pointing enthusiastically at the mirrored glass skyscraper. He has a big company that builds beautiful houses for people who have money. Are you going to work there with him when you grow up? Lucas asked with genuine curiosity. I don't know yet. Sometimes I think about becoming a doctor to help sick children who don't have money to pay for treatment. Eduardo almost lost control of the steering wheel when he heard those words. Being a doctor had been exactly the dream he himself had cherished passionately in his childhood, long before he was forced by family circumstances to inherit the family's lucrative businesses. It was an old and deep desire that he had never shared with Pedro because he didn't want to artificially influence his future career decisions. I also want to be a doctor when I grow up, Mateus said suddenly with surprising determination to take good care of poor people who can't afford expensive consultations and medicines. I want to be a teacher, Lucas added with the same conviction, wanting to teach children to read, write, and do math well, even if they were poor. Tears burned intensely in Eduardo's eyes. The three children had noble and altruistic dreams, fully aligned with the ethical and moral values he had strived to instill in Pedro since he was a child. It was as if they shared not only their physical appearance, but also their character, principles, and even their deepest dreams. When they finally arrived at the majestic mansion, with its extensive, perfectly manicured gardens and imposing classical architecture, Lucas and Mateus stood completely transfixed at the main entrance. The three-story house, with its huge white columns and gleaming glass windows, looked like a real royal palace to the eyes of two children who had slept so many nights outdoors on the dangerous streets of the city. Do you really live here in this giant house? Mateus asked, his voice almost inaudible with amazement. It's very big and beautiful. It must have about 100 different rooms. It has 22 rooms in total, Pedro corrected with a proud and innocent smile. But we only use a few of them. The rest are always closed because it's too big for just two people. Rosa Oliveira, the experienced housekeeper who had been caring for the house with dedication for exactly 15 years, immediately appeared at the front door with her usual elegant and impeccably professional demeanor. Seeing Eduardo arrive unexpectedly with three absolutely identical children, her expression changed from interest to utter shock. She had known Pedro intimately since he was a newborn, and the physical resemblance was so incredible that she dropped the heavy keys she was holding in her hand with a loud clatter. My God, blessed be, she murmured softly, quickly crossing herself 3 times in a row. Mr. Eduardo, what impossible story is this? How can there be three identical Pedros? Rosa, I'll explain everything to you later, said Eduardo, hurriedly entering the house with the three children. For now, I urgently need you to prepare a hot bath for Lucas and Mateus and something nutritious and delicious for them to eat in abundance. The woman, still completely bewildered by this surreal situation, immediately reverted to her maternal and protective instincts. She looked at the two visibly malnourished children with genuine compassion and practical concern. These little ones urgently need specialized medical attention, Mr. Eduardo. They are very thin, pale, and covered in wounds. It seems they haven't eaten well in weeks. Eduardo nodded silently, although his mind was focused on much more urgent and complex issues. He desperately needed to confirm his growing suspicions before making any final decisions that could affect everyone's future. While Rosa carefully led Lucas and Mateus to the spacious bathroom on the ground floor, Pedro remained thoughtful next to his father in the luxurious living room, staring out the window where his possible brothers were bathing. Dad, they're my real brothers, aren't they? He asked with the seriousness of someone who already instinctively knew the answer. Eduardo knelt in front of his son, tenderly took his small shoulders, and looked directly into his bright green eyes. Pedro, it's very possible that they are, my son, but I need to be absolutely certain scientifically before I say anything definitive. I'm already completely sure, Pedro affirmed with unshakable conviction, placing his little hand on his chest. I feel it here inside. It's as if a very important part of me, which had always been missing, had finally come home. Eduardo hugged him tightly, trying to contain the avalanche of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him completely. Pedro's pure intuition coincided perfectly with all the evidence that was accumulating, but he needed irrefutable scientific proof before accepting such a shocking and transformative reality. When Lucas and Mateus finally emerged from the long bath, dressed in Pedro's clean clothes, which fit them perfectly in every detail, the physical resemblance was even more evident and striking. With clean, shiny, carefully combed hair and angelic faces free of street grime, the three children looked like identical reflections in perfect mirrors. It was impossible to distinguish any significant differences between them, except for the slightly different shades of their hair. Rosa then appeared with a large tray full of nutritious sandwiches, assorted fresh fruits, cold whole milk, and homemade cookies still warm from the oven. The children began to eat with impeccable manners, but Eduardo noticed with a heavy heart how they devoured absolutely everything with desperate speed, the primitive instinct of chronic hunger still present and dominant. "Slow down, my little angels," said Rosa with genuine maternal affection. "There is much more delicious food in the kitchen. You don't need to rush. You can eat as much as you want." "Sorry, Doña Rosa," said Lucas, embarrassed, stopping immediately. "It's just that we haven't eaten well in a long time. We forgot how to behave. You don't need to apologize, my dear child. Eat calmly and slowly. This house is now yours too." Eduardo strategically took advantage of that moment of calm to make some extremely urgent and important phone calls. First, he contacted his trusted personal physician, Dr. Enrique Almeida, a renowned and respected pediatrician who had been carefully monitoring Pedro since his birth and knew the family's entire medical history. "Dr. Enrique, I need a very urgent personal favor. Could you come to my house tonight? It's a very delicate medical situation involving some children." "Of course, Eduardo. Has something serious happened to Pedro?" "Pedro is in perfect health, but I urgently need detailed DNA tests on three children, including him." There was a long and significant pause on the other end of the line. DNA. "Eduardo, what kind of complicated situation is this?" "I'd rather explain everything in person when I arrive. Can you bring the complete kit for collecting material?" "Yes, no problem. I'll be there in 2 hours at the most." The second call was to his trusted personal lawyer, Dr. Roberto Mendez, a renowned specialist in family law and child custody issues. "Roberto, I urgently need your expert help with an extremely delicate family matter." "What happened, Eduardo? I may have two other biological children besides Pedro, children who were, let's say, irregularly separated from him at birth." "What do you mean irregularly separated?" "Eduardo, you're making me very worried and confused. It's a long and complicated story. I urgently need to know what my legal rights are as a biological father and how I should proceed correctly. I'll come by early tomorrow morning. Don't do anything rash until we talk in detail." While Eduardo made those calls in his office, the three children played harmoniously in the luxurious living room, as if they had been close brothers for years. Pedro proudly showed off his expensive toys and collections. Lucas taught creative games he had learned during his hard life on the streets, and Mateus told fantastic stories he made up on the spot. The natural synchronicity between the three was both disturbing and beautiful to observe. They laughed in the same tone and gestured identically when they spoke. They even breathed at the same rate when they were succintrating. "Pedro," said Eduardo as he calmly returned to the living room after finishing his calls, "I need to ask Lucas and Mateus some important questions. Can you help your dad?" "Sure, Dad, you can ask whatever you want." Eduardo sat comfortably on the carpet next to the children, trying to keep a casual and relaxed tone, despite the crucial importance of the information he was desperately seeking. Lucas can remember something specific from when they were little babies. Any detail, no matter how small. "Aunt Marcia always said that we were born in a very large and famous hospital," Lucas said thoughtfully, frowning in concentration. "She said it was very difficult and dangerous, that she had to make difficult choices about who to save first." "Choose who to save," Eduardo repeated, feeling his heart beat violently. She also said that our mother was very sick and weak, and that the head doctor said they couldn't save everyone at the same time, so she had to decide to save us. Eduardo felt the world spinning wildly around him. This version matched perfectly with his fragmented and painful memories of the hospital on that terrible night. He clearly remembered the doctors talking in serious tones about difficult decisions, about emergency priorities, about saving whoever was possible in those circumstances. And you know exactly which hospital you were born in. At San Vicente Hospital, Mateus replied immediately, without hesitation. Aunt Marcia always took us there when we were sick or needed medicine. Eduardo almost fainted. San Vicente Hospital was the same expensive private hospital where Pedro had been born, where Patricia had fought for her life and finally died. A hospital frequented exclusively by the city's economic elite. It made no logical sense that supposedly abandoned children would receive regular medical care there unless there was a legitimate and documented family connection. And Aunt Marcia, what did she look like? Do you remember her well? She looked a lot like our real mother, Lucas said thoughtfully. She had black, very long, straight hair, big dark eyes, and she always smelled strongly of cigarettes mixed with sweet perfume. Eduardo felt the blood freeze in his veins. It was a perfect, detailed description of Marcia, Patricia's younger sister. Every detail matched his memories of his troubled sister-in-law exactly, but she was always very nervous and agitated. Matthias continued with a disturbing seriousness, especially when she saw police officers on the street or when strangers asked us questions. What kind of questions exactly made her uncomfortable? About who our real father was? About our family? About where we came from? Lucas explained in detail. She always told us never to talk about those important things with strangers because it was dangerous. Eduardo immediately understood that Marcia lived in constant fear of being discovered and exposed. The behavior described by the children was absolutely typical of someone hiding something extremely serious with severe legal consequences and the possibility of prison. And were you really happy? I mean, were you happy living with Aunt Marcia? The two children looked at each other with a deep and mature sadness that broke Eduardo's heart. It was an expression of pain that no child should know so intimately. We loved her because she took care of us, Mateus said diplomatically, choosing his words carefully. But she always said that taking care of us was very difficult and tiring, that she had sacrificed her whole life for us, and sometimes she would disappear for many days at a time, Lucas added, his voice breaking. She left us completely alone at home or with strangers who didn't even know our names. Eduardo felt intense anger growing steadily in his chest. Anger at Marcia for lying and manipulating the situation. Anger at himself for not seeking more information. Anger at the cruel fate that had brutally separated his children. But at the same time, he felt immense and liberating relief at having found them alive and relatively well. Dad, Pedro said suddenly, interrupting his father's turbulent thoughts. We can stay together forever now. Lucas and Mateus can live here in our house with us as a real family. Eduardo looked deeply into the three pairs of absolutely identical green eyes, fixed on him with expectation and hope, awaiting a definitive answer that would forever and irreversibly change the lives of all of them. The responsibility was overwhelming and terrifying, but the certainty growing in his heart was absolutely unshakable. If you really want to stay, and if all the tests confirm what I firmly believe they will, the three of you will never be separated again. Not even for a single day, he said solemnly. Eduardo's words echoed in the luxurious room like a sacred promise, and the three children instinctively embraced each other with overwhelming emotional force, forming a perfect circle of pure and unexpected joy. Lucas and Mateus began to cry copiously, but they were crystal clear tears of relief and renewed hope, not of sadness or despair. Pedro took the two boys' small hands firmly and protectively, as if he wanted to physically guarantee that they would never be separated again, as if he could prevent cruel fate from tearing them apart once more. Eduardo watched this moving scene, his heart literally overflowing with contradictory and overwhelming emotions. On the one hand, he felt indescribable happiness at having found the children he thought he had lost forever since the traumatic moment of their birth. On the other hand, he was overcome by a growing and paralyzing anxiety. How could he explain this impossible situation to the outside world? to conservative society, to the authorities. How could he justify the sudden appearance of two children identical to his son? How could he prove that there was no irregularity or crime behind it all? At that moment, Rosa appeared silently at the elegant door of the living room, carefully carrying more nutritious food on a silver tray. She stopped abruptly when she saw the three children hugging each other on the marble floor, and her experienced eyes filled with tears of understanding and maternal tenderness. "Mr. Eduardo," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "in all these long years of working devotedly in this house, I have never seen Pedro so genuinely happy and fulfilled. It is as if he has finally found a fundamental part of himself that he did not even know he had lost. Rosa, you can stay and take care of them lovingly while I anxiously await the doctor's arrival. I need to make some very important calls urgently. Of course, Mr. Eduardo, I will take care of the three of them as if they were my own grandchildren." Eduardo slowly made his way up to the elegant office on the second floor. But before he arrived, he heard melodious laughter coming from the main room. It was a pure, crystal-clear sound he had never heard in his entire life. Pedro was laughing with complete joy, without reservation or melancholy. During the 5 years of his beloved son's life, Eduardo had always sensed a certain inexplicable sadness in the child, as if something essential were eternally missing from his existence. Now, hearing that spontaneous and authentic laughter, he understood with absolute clarity that Pedro had always felt the painful absence of his siblings deep down, even though he was not consciously aware of their actual existence. In the orderly silence of his office, Eduardo turned on his modern computer and began to meticulously research everything he could about Marcia Santos, Patricia's troubled sister. He found detailed records of constant changes of address, some police reports for minor crimes, and a very troubling history of chronic financial instability. But what impressed him most was discovering that Marcia had mysteriously received a very significant sum of money from an unidentified source at the precise time of the children's traumatic birth. It was as if someone powerful had deliberately paid her to disappear with the babies and never return. Eduardo's growing suspicions immediately turned to his own family. The Fernandez family had always been notoriously traditional, conservative, and obsessed with maintaining an impeccable public image. Having triplets in a complicated and unplanned pregnancy, with a young mother tragically dying in childbirth, could have been interpreted as a devastating scandal, something that had to be covered up at all costs. Perhaps his own authoritarian and cold parents, Pedro's conservative grandparents, had orchestrated that cruel and inhumane separation. Suddenly, the phone rang loudly, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was Dr. Enrique calling from his car. "Eduardo, I'll be there in a few minutes. I brought everything necessary for the DNA tests, but I must warn you that the complete results will only be ready in exactly 72 hours. Dr. Enrique, in addition to the day, I need you to carefully examine the two children. They have been living abandoned on the streets and may have developed serious health problems. Don't worry, I brought my complete medical equipment. We will do a detailed evaluation of everything." When Eduardo calmly descended the marble stairs, he found a domestic scene that moved him more than anything else in his adult life. Rosa had lovingly prepared an impeccable snack on the elegant table in the living room, and the three children were sitting politely like little gentlemen, chatting animatedly about their dreams and future plans. There was a natural harmony among them that transcended all logic. "When I'm a doctor," said Pedro with a sparkle in his green eyes, "I'm going to have a big hospital just to take care of poor children who don't have money. And I'm going to be a doctor too," added Mateus with equal determination. "But I'm going to take loving care of abandoned animals, because they suffer just like people do. And I'm going to be a teacher," said Lucas with admirable conviction, "to patiently teach children who never had the opportunity to really study." Eduardo was deeply impressed by the naturalness with which the three projected a joint and integrated future, as if they had always known instinctively that they would be united in facing life. It was as if they shared not only genes, but also values, dreams, and an identical view of the world. Dr. Enrique arrived punctually at the agreed time, carefully carrying two heavy professional medical bags. He was a distinguished 60-year-old man with completely gray hair and elegant gold-rimmed glasses that inspired immediate confidence and credibility. He had known Eduardo since college and had professionally accompanied him through the devastating tragedy of Pedro's birth and Patricia's death. Eduardo said calmly as he entered the room, stopping abruptly when he saw the three children gathered together. Merciful God, what an absolutely impossible resemblance this is. It is precisely about this inexplicable resemblance that I urgently need to talk to you, Eduardo replied seriously. Dr. Enrique approached the children cautiously with the typical care and natural delicacy of an experienced pediatrician who had dedicated decades to childcare. Hello, dear children. I am Dr. Enrique, Pedro's personal physician for many years. You can affectionately call me Dr. Enrique. Hello, doctor, said Lucas and Mateus in unison, with the impeccable manners that Eduardo had already noticed and admired repeatedly. I need to do some very simple medical tests on you. It's okay, it won't hurt at all, I promise. While the doctor meticulously examined the children with specialized instruments, Eduardo explained the entire complex situation in minute detail. Dr. Enrique listened attentively, with growing astonishment and medical and ethical concern. Eduardo, if all this is scientifically confirmed, we are facing an extremely delicate, illegal medical situation. These children were criminally deprived not only of their biological family, but also of adequate medical care. The detailed medical examination revealed that Lucas and Mateus were visibly malnourished with mild but concerning anemia and some significant vitamin deficiencies. However, there was nothing that could not be completely reversed with proper nutrition, nutritional supplementation, and regular medical care. They will need intensive nutritional support and medical monitoring for the next 6 months, the doctor explained with professional seriousness. But they are naturally strong and resilient children. With proper care, they will make a full recovery. Collecting material for the DNA test was surprisingly quick and painless. Dr. Enrique carefully took saliva samples from the three children with special sterile swabs. He meticulously labeled everything with specific codes and stored it in appropriate airtight containers. Eduardo, I will personally take this precious material to the most reliable and discreet laboratory I know. In exactly 72 hours, we will have definitive scientific confirmation. After the trusted doctor left, Eduardo calmly gathered the three children in the cozy living room for a serious and important conversation. Children, I need to explain something very important to you so that you understand it well. There is a real possibility that you are biological siblings, but we must wait patiently for a scientific test to officially confirm it. We already know with absolute certainty that we are siblings, said Pedro with unshakable conviction. We don't need any scientific test to confirm what we already feel. I know that perfectly well, my son, but adults and authorities need irrefutable scientific proof to make important legal decisions. And if the test says we're really brothers, Lucas asked with visible anxiety, we'll be able to stay here in this house forever. If the result is positive, the three of you will never be separated again, not even for a single day. That is my most sacred promise. Matthias, who had remained thoughtful and silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke in a small but firm voice. Mr. Eduardo, can we really call you Dad? The innocent question was like an emotional punch in Eduardo's stomach. For exactly 5 lonely years, only Pedro Queso had called him Dad. Hearing that sacred word from the mouth of a child he had met only a few hours ago awakened deep feelings he didn't even know existed in his heart. Can you call me whatever you feel most comfortable with? He replied, his voice breaking with emotion. Then you are already our dad from this moment on, Lucas said with touching simplicity, and we will never be alone or abandoned again. On that special and transformative night, Eduardo carefully settled Lucas and Mateus into luxurious rooms next to Pedro's. But the three children insisted categorically on sleeping together in Pedro's family room. We've slept apart our whole lives, Pedro explained with touching seriousness. Now we want to be close together to make up for lost time. Eduardo agreed immediately, deeply moved by their instinctive need to remain physically close after years of forced separation. He placed extra mattresses on the floor of Pedro's room and organized a kind of cozy family camp. As the children quietly got ready for bed, Rosa discreetly approached Eduardo with a serious expression. Mr. Eduardo, can I tell you something important? Of course, Rosa. Speak freely. I have worked devotedly with children for more than 30 years of my life. I have seen many different and complex situations. But what happened here today in this house was the work of God. Those children recognized each other in a way that has no human explanation. Do you really believe they are genuinely siblings? Mr. Eduardo, I absolutely do not need a DNA test to be sure. It is enough to observe closely how they behave together naturally. They are like three perfect pieces of a puzzle that finally fit into the right place. Before going to bed, Eduardo quietly went to the children's room to wish them good night with affection. He found the three of them lying side by side on the mattresses with Pedro strategically in the middle, firmly holding Lucas and Mateus's hands like a natural protector. "Dad," Pedro whispered in the dark, "thank you so much for finding my lost brothers. Thank you for taking us in off the street," whispered Lucas with infinite gratitude. "Thank you for not kicking us out," added Mateus, his voice full of emotion. Eduardo gently kissed the foreheads of the three children, feeling an emotional and spiritual fulfillment he had never experienced in his entire adult life. "Good night, my beloved children. Sleep peacefully and safely. Daddy is here to take care of you forever." Later, completely alone in his quiet room, Eduardo resolutely called his mother, Doña Elena Fernandez, the authoritarian matriarch of the traditional family. "Mom, I urgently need to tell you something extremely important." "What happened now, Eduardo? Did something serious happen to Pedro?" "Pedro is perfectly fine, but today I found two abandoned children who could be my biological sons." There was a long, meaningful silence on the other end of the line. "How is that possible, Eduardo? Two children who are absolutely identical to Pedro. I firmly believe that they are the other babies who were born with him on that terrible night." "Eduardo, you're completely delusional. Pedro has always been an only child. There were absolutely no other babies at the birth." "Mom, I clearly remember confusing fragments of that traumatic birth. I remember the doctors talking urgently about difficult decisions, about saving whoever was humanly possible. And these children know intimate details that they could only know if they had actually been born in that specific hospital on that exact day. That's completely impossible and absurd. If there had been other babies, I would have known everything. You knew that perfectly well, Mom. Now I am absolutely certain of it, and I want to know immediately what exactly happened to my missing children." The silence that followed was deafening and tense. Eduardo could clearly hear his mother's heavy, irregular breathing on the other end of the line. "Eduardo, come home early tomorrow. We need to talk urgently in person about all this." "Why exactly can't you tell me right now?" "Because it's an extremely delicate conversation that must be done face to face, and bring the children with you. I need to see them with my own eyes." Hanging up the phone with trembling hands, Eduardo lay awake all night, staring out the large window and obsessively thinking about everything that had happened on that absolutely extraordinary and transformative day. In less than 12 intense hours, his life had changed completely and irreversibly. From a single father of an only child, he had become the devoted father of triplets. From a man with a small, controlled family, he had become responsible for three children who desperately needed care, unconditional love, and constant protection. But most painful of all was discovering that for 5 long years, he had been living an elaborate and cruel lie. His other two biological children had not died at birth, as he had always sincerely believed. They had been deliberately taken away, criminally hidden, and raised far from him for sinister reasons he still did not fully understand. Through the silent window, Eduardo could see the first golden ray of sunlight rising majestically on the horizon. A new day was slowly dawning, and with it the concrete promise of definitive answers to questions that had tormented him for years. "Tomorrow, at last, we will know the whole truth," he murmured to himself, thinking tenderly of the three children sleeping peacefully in the next room, finally reunited after 5 cruel years of forced and unnecessary separation. The morning arrived sooner than expected, heralded by the soft sounds of the children moving around in the adjoining room. It was barely 6 a.m. when Eduardo heard low laughter and whispered conversations coming from Pedro's room. He got up quietly and peered through the half-open door to observe a scene that filled him with tenderness and melancholy at the same time. The three of them were sitting in a circle on the floor, still in their pajamas, sharing cookies that Pedro had hidden in a drawer. Lucas was teaching Mateus a card trick while Pedro watched intently, trying to learn too. It was as if that morning they were making up for years of lost games. "Good morning, boys," said Eduardo, entering the room with a genuine smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Dad, it was the best night of my life," Pedro replied immediately. "I dreamed we were flying together in the sky." "I dreamed we were flying too," Lucas added in amazement, "and there was a beautiful woman smiling at us from the sky." Eduardo felt a chill run down his spine. Patricia had always said that when she died, she wanted to fly free like a bird. Was it possible that the children had dreamed of the mother they never knew? "And I dreamed that we lived in a big house with a garden full of flowers," Matthias added. "And we had a brown dog that played with us." Eduardo almost stumbled. Before Patricia's death, they had planned to buy a golden retriever to accompany the baby that was about to be born, a dream he had never mentioned to Pedro. At that moment, Rosa appeared at the door with a tray of hot chocolate and fresh rolls. "Good morning, my little angels. Eat a good breakfast, because today will be an important day." While the children were eating breakfast, Eduardo received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Roberto, his lawyer, calling earlier than expected. "Eduardo, I need to talk to you urgently." "Something serious happened during the night." "What was it, Roberto?" "The police received an anonymous tip about child abduction. Someone said that you are holding two children in your house against their will." Eduardo felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean, abduction? Those children were abandoned on the street." "I know, but the complaint has been filed, and now the Child Protection Agency wants to pay a visit. They could arrive at any moment." "Roberto, those children are my sons." "I'm sure they are, Eduardo, but until we have DNA proof, legally they are still missing minors. You need to cooperate fully with the authorities." After hanging up, Eduardo gathered the children in the living room. He had to prepare them for what might happen. "Boys, some important people may come today to ask you some questions. I want you to always answer truthfully. Okay?" "What kind of questions?" Lucas asked, sensing the concern in Eduardo's voice about how they got here, how they feel, if anyone forced them to stay. "No one forced us," Mateus said firmly. "We chose to stay because this is our home." Then Pedro approached his father and took his hand. "Dad, they're not going to separate us, are they?" "I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen, son." "Give." At 9 a.m., two cars pulled up in front of the mansion. A social worker, a psychologist, and a representative from the Guardianship Council got out of the first car. Two uniformed police officers got out of the second car. Eduardo opened the door before they rang the bell. "Good morning. I imagine you are here because of the children, Mr. Eduardo Fernandez?" asked the social worker, a middle-aged woman with glasses and a stiff posture. "I am Dr. Marisa Silva from the Guardianship Council. We received a report about two children who were allegedly being held in your residence. The children are not being held. They are being cared for because I found them abandoned on the street. Even so, we need to talk to them separately to assess the situation." Eduardo agreed but asked to accompany the interviews. The psychologist, Dr. Carmen, was more understanding than the social worker. "Mr. Eduardo, we will talk to the children together first and then individually. It is important that they feel comfortable." The three little ones were taken to the living room where they sat side by side on the large sofa. The resemblance between them did not go unnoticed by anyone. "My God," one of the police officers whispered to his partner. "They look like identical triplets." Dr. Carmen knelt in front of them. "Hello, children. I'm Dr. Carmen, and I'm here to talk to you. Can you tell me how you came to this house?" Pedro answered first. "My dad and I were coming back from school when we saw Lucas and Mateo sleeping on the street. I told my dad that they looked like me." "And you wanted to come here?" the psychologist asked Lucas and Mateo. "Yes," Lucas replied without hesitation. "Pedro said that this would also be our home." "They are happy here." "Very happy," said Mateo Afueu. "For the first time in our lives, we have a real family." The social worker intervened in a more severe tone. "Children, do you know that you can't stay with strangers? Where are the adults who used to take care of you? Aunt Marcia left us on the street and never came back," explained Lucas. "She told us she was going to find us a new family, but she lied." "And who is this Aunt Marcia?" "She was our mother's sister," Mateo replied, "but she didn't really like taking care of us." For 2 hours, the officials asked detailed questions, talking to the children individually, to Eduardo, and also to Rosa. The housekeeper was instrumental in clarifying the situation. Doctor, Rosa said to the psychologist, I've been working with children for over 30 years. These little ones are not being coerced or mistreated. On the contrary, I have never seen children so happy and integrated, but the resemblance between them is striking, observed the social worker. How do you explain that? I explain it because they are brothers, Eduardo said firmly. We have already collected samples for the DNA test. In 2 days, we will have confirmation. Until then, the children must remain in state custody, declared the social worker. It's standard procedure. No, Pedro shouted, getting up from the sofa. You can't take my brothers away. Lucas and Mateo began to cry, hugging Pedro. Please don't separate us again, Lucas pleaded. The psychologist observed the reaction with professional attention. Dr. Marisa, these children have a very strong emotional bond. Separating them now could cause psychological trauma, but protocol must consider the children's well-being, interrupted the psychologist. I suggest they remain here under supervision until the DNA results are in. After a long discussion, the officials reached a temporary agreement. The children could stay with Eduardo, but there would be daily visits from the Child Protection Agency, and the situation would be constantly reevaluated. Mr. Eduardo, said the social worker before leaving, any irregularity in the children will be removed immediately. After the authorities left, Eduardo hugged the three of them. Everything will be fine. In 2 days, we will have proof that they are brothers. Dad, said Pedro, why do some people want to separate families? Sometimes, Pedro, people don't understand that family isn't just those who share the same last name, but those who truly love each other. That afternoon, Eduardo decided to take the children to visit Grandma Elena. It was time to face the past and discover the truth about what had happened 5 years ago. The Fernandez mansion was in an even more luxurious neighborhood, with huge gardens and imposing architecture. When they arrived, Doña Elena was waiting on the terrace, elegantly dressed as always. When she saw the 3 children get out of the car, her expression changed dramatically. My God, she murmured, putting her hand to her chest. How is this possible? Hello, Grandma Elena, said Pedro, running to hug her. I brought my brothers so you could meet them. Elena stared at Lucas and Mateo as if she were seeing ghosts. Her hands were visibly shaking. Eduardo, she said in a broken voice, we need to talk immediately. First, I want you to meet Lucas and Mateo, Eduardo replied, bringing the 2 children closer. Children, this is Grandma Elena, Dad's mother. Hello, Grandma, they said shyly. Elena knelt in front of them, observing every detail of their faces. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. They look just like Pedro when he was a baby, she whispered. And they look just like Patricia, too. Eduardo realized that his mother knew more than she had revealed. Mom, do you recognize these children? Elena slowly stood up, wiping away her tears. Eduardo, send the children out to play in the garden. We need to talk about things they shouldn't hear yet. Children, go play outside. Rosa will go with you. When the little ones left, Elena sat down heavily in an armchair. Eduardo, sit down. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about that terrible night. Eduardo sat down in front of his mother, ready to hear what he had suspected for years. Mom, I want to know exactly what happened at the hospital. Eduardo, you have to understand the context. Patricia was dying. There were 3 premature babies, and the doctors said they couldn't save them all. Go on. Your father and I made a terrible decision that night. We decided it was better to save 1 strong baby than to lose all 3. Eduardo felt anger fill his chest. You chose Pedro and abandoned my other children. We didn't abandon them. Marcia offered to take care of the other 2. We thought it would be best. And you never told me. Eduardo, you were devastated by Patricia's death. We thought it would be better not to complicate your pain even more. Complicate? Mom, you stole 2 children from me. You made me live for 5 years believing they were dead. Elena began to cry. Eduardo, I'm sorry. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. The best. And where was Marcia all these years? Why did she abandon the children? Marcia developed drug problems. 2 years ago, we lost all contact with her. Eduardo stood up and walked around the room with growing anger. You destroyed these children's lives. They could have grown up with me, with love and care. Eduardo, it was a decision made in desperation. It was a criminal decision. Eduardo stopped in front of his mother. Now I want you to help me fix the situation. I want all the documents, all the papers related to the birth of the three. Elena nodded, crying, Eduardo, there's something else you should know. What else? The babies were not only born prematurely, they were born with a rare genetic condition that could cause them health problems in the future. Eduardo shuddered. What kind of problems? Heart problems. All three may need corrective surgery when they are older, and they hid that too. The doctor said Pedro was fine for now, and the other two preferred that they die far away from me. Elena couldn't respond. Eduardo left the room and went to look for the children in the garden. He found all three playing happily with Rosa, completely oblivious to the traumatic conversation that had taken place. Kids, let's go home, Eduardo said, trying to control his emotions. Do we know Grandma now? Pedro asked. She loves you very much, just like I do. On the way home, Pedro noticed that his father was restless. Dad, Grandma Elena said something sad. Eduardo took a deep breath before answering. Pedro, sometimes adults make very serious mistakes trying to protect those they love. Grandma made a mistake a long time ago, but now we're going to fix everything and we'll stay together forever, my son. Nothing and no one will separate us again. That night, while the children were asleep, Eduardo received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Enrique. Eduardo, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about the children's tests. Is there a problem, Eduardo? I found something in the blood test that you need to know about immediately. Eduardo's heart raced violently as he listened to Dr. Enrique's extremely concerned and serious tone. There was something in the way the doctor, always experienced and controlled, spoke that awakened a primitive and devastating fear in the businessman's chest. During the last two intense and emotionally exhausting days, Eduardo had experienced a roller coaster of emotions, quickly shifting from the overwhelming joy of being reunited with his children, whom he believed lost forever, to the paralyzing terror of losing them again to the authorities. And now he faced the terrifying possibility that something much more complex, sinister, and disturbing is happening in his life. Dr. Enrique, what specific type of medical problem did you find in the children's tests? Eduardo asked, desperately trying to keep his voice steady as he felt his hands trembling involuntarily like leaves in the wind. Eduardo, I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. It's an extremely delicate, complex, and potentially dangerous matter that needs to be explained in detail in person. I can come by your house right now. The children have been fast asleep for several hours. Wouldn't it be better to talk tomorrow morning? Eduardo, this can't wait until tomorrow. It's about their critical health and something extremely disturbing that I discovered in old medical records that I was able to access through special contacts at the hospital. A cold, terrifying chill ran through Eduardo's entire body. Medical records? Which specific records? Complete and detailed records of Patricia's traumatic delivery. There is crucial information there that completely contradicts everything you think you know about that terrible night. Doctor, you are scaring me and causing me great distress. What exactly are you talking about? I'll be at your house in exactly 20 minutes. Prepare yourself mentally and emotionally, because what I am about to reveal to you will radically and irreversibly change your understanding of everything that happened. Eduardo hung up with his hands shaking as if he had received an electric shock. He slowly went up to the children's room and watched them sleep peacefully, hugging each other, as they always did instinctively every night. Pedro was in the middle, naturally protecting Lucas and Mateo with his small but determined arms. They were a touching image of pure innocence and genuine brotherly love that contrasted sharply with the growing storm of uncertainty and terror in Eduardo's turbulent mind. Exactly 20 minutes later, Dr. Enrique arrived punctually, carrying a bulky, heavy folder and wearing a somber, worried expression that Eduardo had never seen on his normally kind and reassuring face. There was something deeply unsettling about the doctor's demeanor, a palpable attentiveness that put Eduardo on high alert. Eduardo, let's go to your private office immediately. We need complete privacy for this extremely delicate conversation. In the quiet, secluded office, Dr. Enrique carefully placed the folder on the mahogany table and slowly opened it, revealing old medical documents, complex laboratory analyses, and yellowed photographs that Eduardo did not immediately recognize but found disturbingly familiar. Eduardo, first I want you to sit comfortably and prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for what I am about to reveal. It is an extremely complex, delicate, and potentially explosive medical and ethical situation. Doctor, please get straight to the point. I am literally desperate with worry and anxiety. Very well. First, the blood test definitively confirmed my initial medical suspicions. Lucas and Mateo have exactly the same rare congenital heart condition as Pedro. It is an extremely rare genetic anomaly that affects approximately 1 in every 100,000 births. Eduardo breathed a momentary sigh of relief, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. So, they really are my biological children. The DNA test will confirm that scientifically, Eduardo. Here's the devastating problem. The DNA will probably confirm that they are biological siblings, but it may not confirm that you are their direct biological father. How is that? I don't understand. Dr. Enrique took an old, yellow document out of the folder with extreme care. This is the complete and detailed medical report of Patricia's traumatic delivery, which I was able to access through special and confidential contacts at the hospital. Eduardo, that terrible night was much more complicated and disturbing than you remember or were led to believe. Please explain further. Patricia did not have natural triplets. She was naturally pregnant with only Pedro. But during the prolonged and painful labor, a serious and inexplicable medical emergency occurred. She began to have violent convulsions and massive internal bleeding that the doctors could not adequately control. Eduardo leaned forward, listening obsessively to every crucial word. The experienced doctors performed an emergency C-section to save Pedro and desperately tried to save Patricia. But during the surgery, they discovered something completely unexpected and scientifically disturbing. What exactly did they discover, doctor? There were two more developed children in Patricia's womb, but they were not biologically hers. Eduardo was paralyzed. What do you mean they weren't hers? She was visibly pregnant for months. Eduardo, this will seem impossible and absurd, but the medical evidence is irrefutable and scientifically documented. Patricia suffered from what we doctors call superfetation, an extremely rare condition in which a pregnant woman ovulates again and becomes pregnant again during the same existing pregnancy. Is that really possible? Yes, it is possible, but extremely rare. It occurs when a woman ovulates during an already established pregnancy and has sexual intercourse with another man or through artificial intervention. Eduardo felt the world collapsing around him. You're telling me outright that Patricia cheated on me with another man? Not necessarily a voluntary betrayal. There is another, even more disturbing possibility. Dr. Henrique carefully took detailed medical photographs from the folder. These are technical photos of the surgical procedure performed that night. The two children found in Patricia's uterus were approximately 2 weeks less developed than Pedro. And what does that mean scientifically? Eduardo asked. It means they were conceived exactly 2 weeks after Pedro. But Eduardo, here's the most disturbing and frightening part. These children had physical and genetic characteristics that strongly suggest they were not conceived naturally at all. What do you mean, not naturally? Explain in detail, doctor. There is irrefutable medical evidence that these children were the direct result of advanced artificial insemination or clandestine in vitro fertilization. Someone with specialized medical knowledge implanted artificially developed embryos into Patricia's uterus without her knowledge or consent. Or yours. Eduardo stood up abruptly, pacing nervously around the room in a complete and devastating state of shock. This is absolute madness. Who would do something so monstrous and cruel? Eduardo, that is exactly the question that kept me awake all night. Who had regular physical access to Patricia? Who knew her medical condition in detail? Who would benefit significantly from such a complex situation? Doctor, are you implying someone in my own family? I am stating that someone with considerable resources deliberately and coldly orchestrated this entire situation. And that person definitely had substantial financial resources and direct access to extremely advanced medical technology. Eduardo stopped abruptly and stared at the doctor. Marcia was always present at the hospital, asking specific and detailed medical questions. Marcia may have been an important piece in the scheme, but she was definitely not the mastermind behind it all. She simply did not have the financial resources or technical knowledge for something so sophisticated and complex. So who exactly? Eduardo asked. Dr. Enrique hesitated before responding cautiously. Eduardo, I need to ask you an extremely difficult and sensitive question. Your family always showed an obsessive interest in having more direct heirs. My parents always desperately wanted more grandchildren. But Eduardo, what if someone influential in your family coldly decided to artificially create more heirs through genetic manipulation? The suggestion was quite absurd and disturbing that Eduardo had to sit down again, feeling dizzy. Doctor, this sounds like something out of an impossible science fiction movie. Eduardo, the medical technology for this existed perfectly well 5 years ago, and your family has the financial resources and influential medical connections to do exactly that. But why would they do something so drastic without telling me anything at all? Perhaps because they knew perfectly well that you would never willingly accept it, or because they wanted to have total and absolute control over these artificially created children. Eduardo ran his hands through his hair nervously, trying to process information that completely defied his basic understanding of reality. Even if this is true, these children are completely innocent. They desperately need proper medical care and unconditional love. I completely agree, but, Eduardo, there are more serious medical complications. If these children were indeed artificially created using manipulated genetic material from your family, they may have other serious health problems. Not yet detected in the initial examinations, I need to do much more detailed and specific tests. What kind of medical problems? Degenerative neurological problems, severe immune deficiencies, or even significantly reduced life expectancy. Children created through experimental genetic manipulation can have unpredictable and devastating long-term consequences. Eduardo felt intense nausea rising in his stomach. You're telling me outright that Lucas and Mateo could be seriously ill. I'm saying we need to investigate much more deeply and quickly. And Eduardo, there's something else extremely important you need to know immediately. What else could there be, Doctor? Enrique took the last crucial document out of the folder. This is a detailed financial report that I was able to obtain through confidential contacts. Someone paid exactly 2 million reais to an underground fertility clinic precisely during Patricia's pregnancy. 2 million reais. Eduardo, this was definitely not an accident or emotional betrayal. It was a meticulously planned medical project executed with absolute surgical precision. Doctor, I need to confront my family immediately. Eduardo, wait calmly. Before confronting anyone, we need to have absolutely all the irrefutable evidence. And most importantly, we must ensure the physical safety of the children. Safety? Why would they be in real danger? If someone invested 2 million reais to artificially create these children, they may desperately want to recoup their investment. Recoup how exactly? Forced legal custody, total control of their lives, or even worse scenarios. Eduardo felt a primitive panic completely take over his chest. Doctor, these children are not scientific experiments or financial investments. They are my beloved children. Eduardo, in your heart, they are definitely your children, but legally the situation may be much more complicated and dangerous than we imagine. What exactly should I do? First, we will conduct completely detailed genetic testing on Lucas and Mateo. Second, we will discreetly investigate who financed this sinister project. Third, we will prepare an absolutely solid legal defense. And while that is happening, you take care of these children as the loving father they deserve. Because regardless of how they came into the world, they desperately need unconditional love and protection. Eduardo looked out the window at the room where his 3 children were sleeping peacefully. Doctor, even knowing all this, I couldn't love these children any more than I do now. Eduardo, that makes you a truly honorable man. But prepare yourself mentally because when this truth comes to light, there will be influential people who will try to use this situation against you. What kind of people? People who believe that artificially created children do not deserve the same legal rights as those conceived naturally. That is completely absurd and inhumane. Eduardo, you and I know it's absurd, but society is not always rational when it comes to ethical issues like this. Eduardo got up and walked to the window, looking at the full moon illuminating the garden where his 3 children had played happily hours earlier. Dr. Enrique, regardless of how Lucas and Mateo came into the world, They are now my children, and I will fight to the death to protect them. Eduardo, I will help you in any way I can, but you must understand that this fight may be more difficult than you imagine. Why exactly? Because if my theory is correct, there are extremely powerful people involved in this situation. People who will not easily relinquish the control they believe they have over these children. Who would those influential people be? Dr. Enrique carefully put the documents back in the folder and looked Eduardo straight in the eye. Eduardo, based on everything I've discovered, I firmly believe that your own family is at the very center of this elaborate conspiracy. And tomorrow, when you confront your mother with this devastating evidence, you will discover how far they are willing to go to keep their darkest secrets. Dr. Enrique's devastating words echoed through the silent office like a death sentence, leaving Eduardo completely paralyzed and without immediate emotional reaction. The revelation that his own respected family could be involved in such an elaborate, sinister, and inhumane conspiracy to genetically manipulate the artificial creation of children challenged absolutely everything he had firmly believed about the people he had loved, respected, and admired throughout his adult life. The betrayal did not come from strangers or known enemies, but from the people closest to him, in whom he had placed absolute trust in unconditional love. During the sleepless and torturous night that followed, Eduardo remained rigidly seated in his Italian leather armchair, staring out the large window as he obsessively processed the devastating and incomprehensible information he had received. Every time he closed his exhausted eyes, he could clearly see the angelic faces of Lucas and Mateus sleeping peacefully, completely oblivious and innocent to the fact that their very existence could be the direct result of a cruel and calculated scientific experiment, coldly orchestrated by people who should naturally protect and love them unconditionally. The disturbing idea that these pure and innocent children were considered commercial products, financial investments, or scientific experiments by someone in their own family filled him with a cold, calculating, and relentless rage he had never experienced before in his entire existence. It was a fury that transcended ordinary anger, transforming into something more primitive and dangerous. At 5 a.m., when the first golden rays of the sun began to illuminate the distant horizon, Eduardo heard the first melodious sounds coming from the children's room. Low, crystal-clear laughter whispered in cheerful conversations, as always happened magically when the three woke up naturally. He got up quietly and walked carefully to the half-open door, observing once again the touching scene that had become precious and sacred in his daily routine. Pedro was patiently teaching Lucas and Mateos how to make colorful paper airplanes out of pages from a children's magazine, and the three of them were competing amicably to see which one would fly the farthest across the spacious room. The absolute naturalness with which they interacted, the perfect synchronization of their movements, and the genuine joy on their angelic faces contrasted brutally with the disturbing and terrifying revelations of the previous night. "Good morning, my beloved children," said Eduardo, entering the room calmly with a forced but affectionate smile, desperately trying to hide the devastating emotional storm raging violently inside his tortured soul. "We slept well and peacefully, Dad. We had exactly the same dream again," said Pedro with bright enthusiasm in his green eyes. "The three of us dreamed that we were on a beautiful sunny beach, playing happily in the white sand with a beautiful woman with long, silky hair, and she sang us a very beautiful and melancholic song." "Yes," Lucas added with a dreamy expression, "a song that seemed familiar to us from somewhere far away and special." Mateus nodded enthusiastically, adding specific details that sent a chill down Eduardo's spine. "The beautiful woman had green eyes just like ours, and told us affectionately that she had always cared for us with great love, even when we were not consciously aware of it." Eduardo immediately recognized, without the slightest doubt, the detailed description. It was Patricia, just as she often appeared in his own nostalgic dreams during the painful early years after her untimely death. The deep and inexplicable spiritual connection between the three children and the mother they never knew personally was something that transcended any known scientific, medical, or rational explanation, a phenomenon that defied logic and touched on the realm of the supernatural. "Dear children," said Eduardo, sitting affectionately on the floor with them, "today we are going to have a very special and important day. We're going to visit Grandma Elena again, and then we might make some other visits that are very important to our family. Are we going to meet more interesting relatives? Asked Lucas with genuine curiosity and bright eyes full of expectation. You may meet some relatives and perhaps discover some very important things about yourselves and our family, Eduardo replied. Rosa appeared quietly at the door, carefully carrying an elegant tray with breakfast, specially prepared with love and attention. Good morning, my dear little angels. Today I made special pancakes with honey just the way you like them best. While the children happily ate breakfast in the luxurious dining room, Eduardo received an urgent call from his personal lawyer, Dr. Roberto. Eduardo, I have extremely important news about the detailed financial investigation you requested. I have obtained some very interesting and revealing documents about suspicious financial transactions involving your family over the last 5 years. What kind of suspicious transactions? Eduardo asked. Substantial irregular transfers to unofficially registered medical clinics, significant payments to private and clandestine genetic laboratories, and a considerable amount discreetly deposited into an offshore account in the name of Marcia Santos. Eduardo felt his stomach shrink painfully with the confirmation of his worst suspicions. Roberto, I urgently need you to come to my house today. We have a lot to discuss in detail. Eduardo, there is something else extremely important and disturbing. Marcia Santos was found dead last night in a cheap, dirty hotel in the city center. Apparently it was a drug overdose, but there are suspicious circumstances. The news hit Eduardo like a devastating thunderbolt. Marcia was dead, taking with her all the crucial secrets about what had really happened to Lucas and Mateus during the early formative years of their lives. Roberto, this cannot be mere coincidence. Eduardo, I completely agree. Someone powerful didn't want her to talk. We need to act very quickly to protect these innocent children. After hanging up the phone with trembling hands, Eduardo watched the three children playing happily in the luxurious living room, completely unaware of the real dangers surrounding them like invisible predators. Marcia's convenient death definitively confirmed his worst suspicions. There were influential people willing to do anything to keep the dark secrets about Lucas and Mateus's artificial origins. At 10 a.m., Eduardo carefully loaded the three children into the Mercedes and drove with determination to his mother's imposing mansion. During the silent journey through the busy streets of the city, he mentally prepared the difficult and confrontational questions he needed to ask. This time he would not accept diplomatic evasions, convenient half-truths, or elaborate lies. He desperately needed the complete and raw truth, no matter how disturbing, shocking, or devastating it might be to his understanding of reality. Doña Elena waited patiently for him on the elegant terrace, but her posture was visibly different and troubling. She seemed more physically fragile, older and tired, as if she had aged several years in a single torturous night. As she watched the car slowly approach, her expression transformed into a complex mixture of deep guilt, genuine fear, and fatalistic resignation. "Grandma Elena!" Pedro shouted enthusiastically, running to embrace her as soon as he energetically got out of the car. Lucas and Mateo followed immediately, but with more instinctive caution, intuitively sensing that something fundamental had changed in the respected old woman's behavior. "Hello, my dear precious ones," Elena said, her voice completely broken with emotion, hugging the three children with a desperate, almost suffocating intensity. Every day they are more beautiful, intelligent, and similar to each other. Eduardo watched the interaction with obsessive attention, noticing how his mother held the children as if it were the last time she would see them in her entire life. "Mother, can we talk alone right away, Rosa? You can stay and lovingly take care of the children in the garden." "Eduardo, first of all, I desperately need to ask your forgiveness. A sincere apology for everything we did, for all the elaborate lies, for all the unnecessary suffering we caused." Eduardo felt a complex mixture of temporary relief and growing terror. His mother was finally ready to confess everything, but the confession could be much more terrible and devastating than he could ever have imagined, even in his worst nightmares. In the mansion's elegant office, Elena sat heavily in her favorite velvet armchair, suddenly looking much older than her well-lived 65 years. "Eduardo, sit down comfortably. What I am about to tell you will completely destroy everything you believe about our respected family. Mother, I already know that you were directly involved in the artificial creation of Lucas and Mateo. What I desperately need to know is exactly why you did it. Elena sighed deeply as if gathering all the courage she could muster to reveal the darkest and most shameful secret of her life. Eduardo, when Patricia became pregnant naturally with Pedro, we discovered through detailed tests that she had a rare genetic condition that could be passed on to the child. What specific condition? A genetic predisposition to serious heart problems. The medical specialist said categorically that there was a 50% chance that Pedro would be born with serious and potentially fatal health problems. Eduardo leaned forward intensely, paying obsessive attention to every crucial word. Continue with all the details. His father and I were completely desperate and terrified. The Fernandez family had always been known for robust health and exceptional longevity. The terrifying idea of having a sickly and fragile heir was completely unacceptable to us. So what exactly did you do? We discreetly contacted a renowned scientist, Dr. Marcos Veloso, a world specialist in advanced genetic manipulation. He proposed a revolutionary experimental solution. What specific solution? To create two genetically modified and enhanced children who would be perfectly compatible with Pedro for eventual organ transplants, but who would also have genetically corrected versions of the problematic genes. Eduardo felt nausea rising violently in his stomach. They created Lucas and Mateo as spare parts for Pedro. It wasn't that simple or cruel, Eduardo. Dr. Veloso personally assured us that the children would be completely healthy and normal, with only a few significant genetic enhancements. What kind of genetic enhancements? Greater natural resistance to disease? Increased intelligence? Prolonged longevity? It was like giving them an objectively better life. And how they implanted the artificial embryos in Patricia. Elena visibly hesitated, struggling intensely with overwhelming guilt. During a routine prenatal consultation, Dr. Veloso slightly manipulated Patricia and implanted the modified embryos. She never knew what had really happened. You criminally violated my wife's body without her consent. Eduardo, we sincerely thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Patricia would have more children, and Pedro would have siblings who could save him if necessary. And when she tragically died in childbirth, it was a completely unforeseen complication. Dr. Veloso said there was no connection whatsoever to the experimental procedure. And Marcia? What exactly was her role? Marcia agreed to take care of the two children in exchange for a considerable sum of money. She would be like a surrogate mother until they were needed. Necessary. Necessary for what exactly? To save Pedro if he developed heart problems, or to continue the family line with improved genes. Eduardo stood up abruptly, pacing nervously around the room with growing, uncontrollable anger. Mother, they turned innocent children into merchandise. They are not products or tools. Eduardo, I know it seems terrible now, but at the time we thought we could play God with human lives. Elena began to cry copiously. Eduardo, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, but you need to understand that we did it out of love. Love for you, love for Pedro, love for the family, love mother. That wasn't love. It was pure and cruel selfishness. Eduardo, there's something else you need to know about Lucas and Mateo. What else? They weren't created with only your genes. Dr. Veloso used genetic material from various sources to create perfect profiles. Eduardo stopped walking, feeling the world spinning violently. What other sources? Genes from individuals with superior intelligence, Olympic athletes, people with exceptional longevity. They're like a compilation of the best human traits available. So they're not even my biological children. Biologically, approximately 60% of their genes are yours. The rest were artificially selected. Eduardo had to lean on the table to keep from fainting completely. Where is that Dr. Veloso now? He died in a car accident 2 years ago. And last night, and Marcia, I know about Marcia. Conveniently, all the people who knew the truth are disappearing. Eduardo, it wasn't what, Mother? It wasn't planned. It wasn't convenient for the witnesses to disappear. Elena remained silent, her expression confirming Eduardo's worst suspicions. Mother, who else knows about this? Only your Aunt Carolina and me. Your father died taking the secret with him. Carolina knew. She helped finance the project. Yes, she was the one who found Dr. Veloso. Eduardo felt he was uncovering a family conspiracy much deeper than he had imagined. Where is Carolina now? She traveled to Europe last night. She said she needed to get away for a while. Running away, you mean? Eduardo looked at the children through the window, watching Pedro teach Lucas and Mateo to climb the big tree in the garden. Mother, you lost the right to be these children's family the moment you decided to create them as pieces in a game. Eduardo's final words echoed in the office like a final sentence, forever severing the family ties that had been built over decades. Elena remained silent for several long minutes, absorbing the magnitude of the rupture her actions had caused. The weight of guilt seemed physical, curving her shoulders and further aging her face already marked by remorse. Eduardo approached the window and watched the three children in the garden, completely oblivious to the conversation that was sealing their fates. Pedro had managed to climb the tree and was helping Lucas do the same while Mateo cheered them on from below. The scene was one of pure innocence, a stark contrast to the sinister complexity of its origins. Elena, Eduardo finally said, his voice breaking, I know I can't undo what we've done. I know I've lost the right to be these children's grandmother, but at least let me contribute financially to their care. Money. Eduardo turned to look at her, his eyes shining with coldness. Do you think money can make up for what you did? I don't know that it can, but at least I can make sure they have everything they need, that they have everything through my work and my love. I don't want a penny of that money used to finance that aberration, Eduardo replied. Elena lowered her head, accepting the refusal. What if something happens to you? She asked. If they need care that you can't provide, they'll have Rosa, who genuinely loves them, and they'll have Dr. Enrique, who promised to take care of them. They will have people who see them as human beings, not as experiments, replied Eduardo. Elena walked over to an old drawer where she kept important documents. Eduardo, is there anything else you need to know? She said, taking out a sealed folder. These are all the medical documents related to the procedure, everything Dr. Veloso documented, all the tests, all the specific modifications that were made. Eduardo took the folder reluctantly. Why are you giving me this now? Because if something happens to me, you'll need this information. The doctors who will treat them in the future need to know exactly what was done. Eduardo tucked the folder under his arm. Is there anything else I should know? Just one more thing. Carolina left a letter for you, Elena said. Eduardo read it quickly, frowning. The letter said that Carolina was leaving permanently for Europe and would never return to Brazil. At least she had the decency to disappear, Eduardo muttered, crumpling the paper. He headed for the door. I'll go get the children. Eduardo. Wait, Elena stopped him. Can I at least say goodbye to them properly? Eduardo paused. He considered for a moment and then thought about everything he had discovered. No, Mother, they don't need to bear the burden of saying goodbye to someone who saw them as conveniences. To them, you will be just the grandmother they visited a few times. In the garden, he found the three children still playing happily. Kids, it's time to go, he announced, trying to keep his tone light. During the car ride, Eduardo listened to the children's voices in the back seat, feeling an immense love and a growing determination in his chest. Regardless of how they had come into the world, they were now his. That same afternoon, Dr. Henrique returned with more equipment, accompanied by Dr. Roberto and a new social worker. After examining the children and talking with them at length, they all agreed that they were in a loving and suitable environment. Dr. Roberto began the legal process to regularize the children's situation, creating official documentation that recognized them as Eduardo's adopted children. The process took a few months, but it was successfully completed. That night, Eduardo gathered the three children in the living room for an important conversation. He told them a carefully edited version of the truth. They had been born together, but difficult circumstances had separated them when they were babies, until fate brought them together on that special day on the street. So, are we really brothers? Asked Lucas. Yes, you are brothers in blood, heart, and soul, Eduardo replied. And we will always be together, Mateo asked. Forever. Nothing and no one will ever separate our family again. In the months that followed, life established a new and stable routine. Lucas and Mateo were enrolled in Pedro's school, where they stood out for their exceptional intelligence. Rosa officially assumed the role of caregiver for the three children. Dr. Enrique became the family's exclusive pediatrician, carefully monitoring the children's health. 3 months later, Dr. Roberto concluded all legal proceedings. Lucas and Mateo Fernandez officially existed with valid documents and all the rights of biological children. Eduardo's business prospered during this period as if renewed love had energized every aspect of his life. Elena kept her promise to stay away, sending only occasional cards.